Welcome to this look at 5 MSFS airplanes which, in my opinion at the time of publishing, are currently best avoided. Let's get right into it. MSFS comes with 2 iconic long-haul Boeing airplanes. In fact, this was one of my main reasons to move from X-Plane to the new Microsoft simulator. However, although the airplanes themselves look great and fly convincingly, the default autopilot is terrible if you want to fly in a realistic way. There are 2 main issues. The first relates to the largely broken VNAV, and I use that term loosely, as in reality it's a dumb climb and descent mode tied to the navlog profile, which has no regard for speed or altitude limitations published in SIDS or STARS, therefore making it useless for VATSIM etc. Despite using the navlog profile as a guide, the default VNAV has a habit of completely ignoring it at random and decelerating or descending during cruise. This can occur thousands of miles from what should be the top of descent, essentially prohibiting long-haul flights, as you need to constantly monitor the aircraft to make sure it doesn't do anything weird. As a wise man once said, if you have to babysit autopilot, it's not an autopilot. I'll note here that you can reliably fly these airplanes in flight level change and altitude hold vertical modes, but 1, no airliner is ever flown in this way in normal flight, and 2, this makes you entirely reliant on the sim's built-in ATC for vertical navigation. The second major issue is that there's some kind of long-standing bug with the default Boeings in MSFS, where the aircraft may start to nosedive just before turning on to final, entirely ignoring any currently engaged vertical modes. This always requires manual intervention and is guaranteed to ruin your day. It's worth noting that this does not happen on every approach at every airport. It specifically occurs during the transition from STAR to approach procedure on certain routes, regardless of aircraft configuration, fuel or weight. The fun part is that you don't know if the route you're currently flying will suffer from this issue until the end of your 14-hour flight, which makes the whole experience something of a crapshoot. Luckily, a comprehensive fleet of Boeing airplanes is being developed by PMDG, but until that happens, if it's Boeing, I ain't going. Next up is the CaptainSim 767. I debated whether to include this or the RHD 767 here, but ultimately settled on the CaptainSim, purely because the RHD is cosmetically more authentic and I had to pick one of the 2. The main issue with these airplanes is that they still use the default autoflight system, and in my experience, every problem that I mentioned in the default Boeing segment of this video also applies to the CaptainSim and RHD 767s. This renders them essentially useless for their main purpose, long-haul flights. I don't really need to say any more, so let's move on. Early access is a label I'm generally wary of. Throughout the interactive entertainment industry, it was initially used for products that were almost finished, largely in late alpha or beta stage that needed a little more testing before release, testing that could only be achieved at scale. The price was also generally quite attractive to encourage widespread take-up of the product. However, in recent years, the label has often been applied to products that are in very early alpha stages, where it's entirely unknown whether the product will ever achieve its promised potential, and the whole situation feels a little more uncertain, almost akin to crowdfunding. Pricing is also quite unattractive in some cases. A recent well-known example of this is Kerbal Space Program 2, an obviously early-stage game with no guarantee that it will deliver on its promises, being sold at an almost retail price. In my opinion, the current state of the Flight Sim Studios Embraer sits firmly in this camp. At the time of writing, it's a product that is functionally just above a default aircraft, and therefore below the standard of some freeware, such as the Fly-by-Wire project. The Flight Sim Studio features a great 3D model with custom flight dynamics, tied to mostly default systems, with some custom electrical, hydraulic, and UI elements. My understanding is that there are plans for entirely custom, almost study-level flight management and auto-flight systems, and the aircraft does receive patches every month with feature enhancements and bug fixes. However, it's obvious that the Flight Sim Studios Embraer is still a very long way off delivering on some of its goals, and whether it will achieve them remains to be seen. To summarise, in my view, this airplane has so far taken some early steps on a very long journey, a journey which some developers never complete. I do hope that this Embraer can achieve its goals, and that the current €40 asking price will one day be seen as great value, but for now, I very much consider purchasing this airplane to be something of a gamble. The DC Concorde is yet another airplane that is hamstrung by its reliance on default MSFS systems. However, the issues caused by these systems are quite unique when it comes to an airplane like Concorde. To explain, we first need to understand a little about how systems are programmed in MSFS. When following a flight plan, an airplane must constantly adjust its path to stay on track. This is achieved through automatic flight control inputs. The sensitivity of these inputs, that is, how far an airplane is allowed to wander off track before correcting itself, varies for each aircraft. The same is true for the intensity of these inputs, how much roll and pitch is applied to bring the airplane back on target. As the speed of an airplane increases, smaller adjustments have a larger effect. Therefore, an aircraft like Concorde should be programmed to make very small, infrequent adjustments to prevent it constantly overcorrecting during flight. This is something that DC Designs have programmed very well. Concorde holds its nav track at Mach 2 with no issues, whereas a lot of other supersonic aircraft built for MSFS tend to roll and wander constantly during cruise. So why is this an issue? Well, in X-Plane, when building an aircraft, the developer is able to set different sensitivity and intensity parameters for following a flight plan versus following a localizer. In MSFS, the same parameters are used for both flight plan and localizer following. This causes an issue in the DC Concorde, as its lateral adjustments have been tuned with supersonic flight in mind, and not with consideration for the frequent micro adjustments required to follow a localizer at 170 knots. The result of this is that the DC Concorde struggles to follow localizers and, in my experience, frequently lands to the left or right of a runway, even on occasions where approach mode is activated when the aircraft is already on runway heading, and especially in windy conditions that the real-world aircraft and other simulations of it could comfortably handle. I don't blame DC Designs for prioritizing flight plan following over localizer following. This is ultimately a limitation of the sim, not the product, but I would have liked to have seen some custom code used in this aircraft to enable separate parameters for different lateral modes. Other developers, both established and new, across freeware and payware, have delivered custom lateral modes, for example Fly-by-Wire, Phoenix, PMTG and more. So it's disappointing when an established developer like DC Designs does not make such an effort, especially for an iconic aircraft. The other elephant in the room with the DC Concorde is fuel trim, specifically the need for the pilot to manage it, therefore taking on flight engineer responsibilities in addition to flying the airplane. I have add-ons built for Flight Sim 2004 that feature a virtual flight engineer who adjusts fuel trim for you during the flight, and the Collimata Concorde for X-Plane offers the same functionality. The DC Concorde offers a compromise in the form of a switch that allows the pilot to move fuel trim forward and aft without having to worry about the detail of which tanks to trim. But 1, I've never personally known this to actually work in any of my flights in the DC Concorde, and 2, this functionality could be automated with relatively simple custom code based on flight profile and CG. Again, it's disappointing to see DC Designs seemingly shy away from writing custom code, especially when a relatively small change would be a huge quality of life improvement for the product and a step towards feature parity with its peers, both past and current. For these reasons, I can't recommend the DC Concorde. In my opinion, it's a missed opportunity and a headache to fly. Luckily, various Concorde add-ons by different developers are currently work in progress, so the dream of a great Concorde for MSFS is not dead yet. At the top of the list is an airplane that, in my opinion, is so truly half-assed that I can't bring myself to spend too much time on it. The Bredok Eurofighter has systems from a default Boeing, a barely functional autopilot, and, worst of all, a price tag above zero. Even when this airplane was briefly available for free, it still cost me too much hard drive space to justify keeping it around. To be fair to Bredok, their 737 MAX has continued to improve, which is why it's not featured in this video, and I understand the need for developers to experiment and cut their teeth on simple projects when developing for a new simulator. But for the love of whatever deity you believe in or not, there are some things that are best kept to oneself and not slapped on the marketplace for $15 to $20. Enough said. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you found this entertaining. If you did, please drop a like, and feel free to subscribe as I make regular sim videos. Take care, and I'll see you next time.